Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about conflict resolution. This has been a big topic in my own life and definitely with clients, and I feel like it's so easy to take the grace and devotion out of relationships when we have conflict that has no boundaries, no sacredness, and no real understanding of the opportunity conflict offers to expand and grow and to discover so much more about ourselves. So my question to you today is, what would it feel like if every time conflict arose, instead of having an intention to be right or to prove someone wrong or to run away from that conflict or to take all of the feelings of sadness, frustration, anger, whatever you're feeling in that moment when the conflict arises, and dumping it on someone, what would it feel like to go, wow, there's a lot of energy here. You know, my body is trying to communicate something to me and potentially to someone else, you know, to the person who's involved in the conflict, whether it's a beloved, an employee, a friend. What would happen if we explored that together? And how do we explore that in an environment where we're respecting each other and respecting ourselves? So, some food for thought. What would happen if when conflict arose, you actually set up a sacred space or an environment where you could both communicate equally, where one person was really listening while one person talked. There was no interrupting or going back and forth. We spoke in the I instead of in the you. And we really were interested in what was happening here and what was happening for the other person. There is so much written about how to deal with conflict and what to do when conflict arises in order to resolve, and just really common ideas in the spiritual world, like come from love and what would love do now, and practice forgiveness, practice kindness, practice compassion, all these virtues which sound very good in theory and are very good, but very difficult to actually harness when we're in that moment of heated reaction. So a lot of my work is helping people move from those lower reactive centers up into the heart and into their awareness without spiritual bypass. So, you know, what do I mean by spiritual bypass? Spiritual bypass is when we have that reaction happening and we bypass into the mind and go, okay, well, I can just be removed from this right now and detached from the situation, or, you know, those virtues I discussed kind of, but there's still this energy here. The body is still trying to tell us something. And often when we're upset about something, it's because the wisdom of our internal being is saying something's not okay here. And from that place, if we can communicate from love, then there can be expansion happening all the time interpersonally. So the most common thing that people do when the potential of conflict arises is that they either avoid it, and that's what's commonly referred to as love avoidance, or they are very attached to resolution, and that's the more love addict that's referred to in a very famous theory called codependency no more. There's been a book written about it and lots of essays written about it. So, and my take home from that really is that we have these two types of people when conflict arises. The type of people who move away from love and withdraw under the guise of needing space, and the people who are grasping for love and needing it to feel okay under the guise of we need to communicate, we need to reach harmony, we need to reach resolution. So both of these ways of dealing with conflict actually create separation rather than resolution. So what's the alternative? I've worked with this a lot in my own relationships and with couples. And what I find is that the biggest difference that you can make to your own life and to somebody else's life when conflict comes to the surface is to actually create a sacred space of communication. So rather than just talking back and forth to each other, where it can easily turn into withdrawing or projecting, blaming, shaming, attacking, explaining, defending, and really the intention is to be right, whether we know it or not, in that space. We create a sacred space where the intention is to come back to love. Just that in itself makes a massive difference. So, okay, there's conflict here. Instead of just going back and forth, one person is brave enough to love first and say, let's sit down. Let's create a ceremony around this. Let's create some sacred space. And then both people take it in turns to talk. And there's certain boundaries within what can be talked about, which, you know, I go into more in my sessions and workshops. But one thing that is really helpful is to speak into the eye, to not actually say you. And then it's like, wow, what happens when I just take responsibility? What happens when I only speak in the eye? It's pretty amazing. You know, you get to know yourself and you get to actually feel what's going on for you. And, you know, questions like, what happens if I only speak in the now and not in the past? What happens if I keep breathing? You know, what happens if I keep focusing on my heart? And what happens if the other person doesn't interrupt me, if I hold a talking stick or I'm honoured in a space where I'm speaking till I'm finished and then it's the other person's turn to speak. So little things that make a big difference.